This is the High-Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. Welcome in, everybody. Happy Tuesday of Week 10. Yeah, that's right. We're at the double-digit weeks of the Fantasy Football Players Championship in 2023, and we're in November. Welcome to November, everybody. Before we get into the show, once again, I should introduce myself, Eric Balkman, from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, and the Better Sports Network's High-Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Want to remind everybody that if you're looking for weekly action in the FFPC, you can get it by going to myffpc.com. myffpc.com. Play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. In this contest, there is no draft. There is no salary cap. You just choose the players that you want to ride throughout the weekend. Only one player per team. No stacking. You can play with a 10-player lineup if you want to go without kickers and defenses. You can play with a 12-team lineup if you want to play with kickers and defenses. Just get them in by 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday and enjoy those points piling up. You can enter for as little as $35. We also have entry fees up to $200, and you can win up to $2,500 as well. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, and share it with your friends and enemies. Click that notification bell in the lower left-hand corner of your screen so you will get notified every time we go live, which the next time will be this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. And on the FFPC socials, I'll tell you who's co-hosting with me this Thursday. It's going to be a fun one, like tonight's show will be. This week, I'm proud to welcome in a multi-league champion in the FFPC over the years. He is sitting in 28th place right now, heading into Week 10 of the Fantasy Pros Championship, as he is chasing a $1 million grand prize in the competition. Please welcome onto these airwaves, Mr. Marc Davidson. Marc, welcome in, man.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Glad to have you aboard. Montezuma's Revenge himself. Where did that name come from?
You know, it just happened many years ago in college, and it seemed to make people laugh. So I stuck with it, and I've had a lot of luck with it.
And that's what it's all about, right?
Yep.
Like, as long as it's working, don't change it as well. Tonight's episode, superstitious, yes. In this episode tonight, we're going to try to figure out what I feel like we've been talking about this every other week on the show, but we get a new twist and turn in that Baltimore running back situation each and every week. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to think about and pontificate on and what it means and give you some actionable advice on Kenneth Walker and his recent poor performance in Seattle, what that means for your fantasy lineups and much more. Remember, RV Radio 2023 is your discount code that you want to use to get a listeners only 10% discount at rotoviz.com. So without further ado, Marc, let's kick things off. Congratulations on being in 28th place overall in the Fantasy Pros Championship after 9 weeks of play. Certainly no small feat there. Normally we don't get into the draft a whole lot at this point in the year on the show, but I do want to touch on your draft a little bit because I was looking over it over the last 24, 48 hours or so. I noticed you were drafting from the 4 spot. 104, you go Tyreek Hill. Coming back in the second round, 209, you get Jalen Waddle. You had a few opportunities to get Tua Tagovailoa late. I'm kind of curious why you decided not to go with Tagovailoa on a team where you stacked Hill and Waddle with your first 2 picks.
Well, what happened was in the third round, there was a run on quarterbacks. This year, to me, seemed like one of those years where you want to get one of those good quarterbacks. I've noticed over the last couple of years, when you get the players like the Josh Allen, the Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, they can make a big difference, basically, rather than waiting until the 12th, 13th, 14th round to just grab somebody. So Tua is a guy that is a very good quarterback, but I was a little leery of because of his concussion history. And with the opportunity to grab Josh Allen there in the third round, I felt I needed to do it. And at that stage, it kind of makes Tua a moot point.
And I think that's important too, because a lot of people will head into their drafts and they won't set out to stack. But if the opportunity presents itself where you can stack late, it doesn't necessarily mean you got to be able to stack, right? Like you can go a different direction, which is actually exactly what you did with Josh Allen there too. And it's given you a unique team, and you're in the top 30 of $1 million grand prize chase heading into week 10. So clearly you are doing something right there. Now, I don't have a whole lot of shares of Kenneth Walker, Mark, but the ones that I do, I've been a little perplexed of what I've seen the last couple of weeks. He is on your 28th place team right now. The last 2 weeks, in each week, he's had fewer than 10 carries. What do you think is going on in Seattle in regards to Kenneth Walker? And as we look forward to this week, going up against the Washington Commanders, is Walker still a guy that you think FFPC players still need to deploy in their starting lineups?
I do. When I go back and look at the last couple of weeks, it's alarming how few plays Seattle's had. They had, I think it was 55 plays 2 weeks ago. They only had 45 plays last week, which is unusually low for an NFL team. And of course, last week was game script dependent. They were getting blown out. There wasn't really a whole lot of opportunity for Walker there. I think, coming into this week, Washington, after their fire sale, I think their defensive line is ripe for the Seattle to get that running game back up and ramped up. And looking at his touch stats versus the total plays in the game, I think he'll be back up over the 20 touches, 15 to 20 touches this week. So I'm not too concerned.
And Charbonnet doesn't play into this at all for you, right? Like you're like whatever Walker's going to do, it's going to be independent of Charbonnet.
Yep, exactly. In my opinion.
A guy I do have a lot of shares of this year is Raheem Mostert. And I wish I had more of Adam Thielen, as I'm sure everybody who's playing in the FFPC or high stakes fantasy football, the KFFSC, what have you, they wish they had more shares of these guys. Your team that sits in the top 30 of the FantasyPros Championship right now, 12th round pick, Raheem Mostert, 13th round pick, Adam Thielen. Now, I'm going to ask you what we missed on these guys as fantasy players that you figured out. But you yourself let these guys slip to round 12 and round 13. But you were actually smart enough to grab them there. But I think this is a good question to ask at this time of the year, Mark. Like when we look towards drafts, and we'll have drafts in the FFPC starting in January, what are the traits? What are the aspects of Mostert and Thielen that we missed on this year that we have to be cognizant of, not necessarily with those guys in 2024, but players like them, so we don't let big time fantasy values like this slip past the 11th round again?
For me, it was production. The thing about Mostert that was really surprising to me is how far he was dropping, even though he was going to be the starting running back. And, everybody kept talking about, they draft a running back early. That's going to be the heir apparent. But Mostert has always been a real productive runner when healthy, kind of a modern day Arian Foster. So, when I got to that stage of the draft and I'm looking for depth, what I'm trying to do is find people that are going to have some value to me at some point. And a starting running back in round 12 has a lot of value to me. The thing is, Mostert's just been a lot healthier this year than even I would have expected. So I've really been fortunate on that. And then for Thielen, the thing is, he's a smart, kind of a Wes Welker type of plug and play receiver. He's a quarterback's best friend. When I looked at that Carolina lineup, I'm looking at basically potentially their wide receiver number one with a rookie quarterback in an offensive scheme that is probably going to try to find, the short routes that are going to be safe. And that's what Thielen really thrives in. So again, 13th round pick, I got a receiver who potentially could be a target hog. And again, that's kind of come to fruition. I've kind of lucked out with that.
I think the thing that we take away from this is, and both things, obviously, to all of us right now, Mark, this seems so obvious. Oh, we should have seen this coming with Mostert and Thielen. But I think the thing to take away is what you said about Mostert, what you said about Thielen. We should not be looking for this in rounds 12 and 13 next year. We should be looking for this in rounds 8, rounds 9. So we get a jump on this to make sure we're collecting all these guys as much as possible. You know, the thing is, if you end up winning the $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship, I know the first 2 jerseys or 2 of the first jerseys you're going to be buying are Mostert and Thielen because of the way they're trending this year. But that's the thing. It's like we're always looking for that edge and then bumping up what we know about players like this a couple of rounds the following year so we can make sure we're getting on that gravy train before it leaves the station. Cortland Sutton is another guy I want to talk about, and I do have him on a couple of teams this year. I looked at your teams earlier today. You're heavily invested in Sutton. You have Sutton on a lot of teams this year. He's sort of been, and I think he's outperformed his draft position this year, borderline second wide receiver on a week-to-week basis. What did you see about him? And maybe we can expand this and talk about the Broncos offense compared to where it was in 2022 to where you thought it would be in 2023. But what was it about Sutton that made you think, okay, this is a guy based on where he's going in drafts right now, I got to make sure I get him on a lot of teams?
Well, I'm a big Bronco fan. Born and raised in Denver my whole life. Huge Bronco fan. And ever since Russell Wilson came over, there's just been a lot of talk about him and Cortland Sutton have built a really good relationship. I know Judy's there, and you do hear talk about Judy being, one of his favorite targets, but Sutton's always been that guy that I keep hearing that is the safety blanket for Wilson. This year, with Sean Payton being the kind of offensive mind that he is, and the offense that he ran in New Orleans, Sutton kind of takes on the Michael Thomas role. And I read a lot of stuff about, how he helped develop Michael Thomas. And again, where Sutton was falling in the drafts, a starting receiver who's got potential to be, a number 1 or a number 2 receiver, falling that low, I just thought it was a no-brainer to have a guy like that on my team, either to start or to have in case of injuries.
And he's been paying off. That's the thing. I think that something that we can go forward with too, Mark, and I'll let you weigh in on this. When you talk about offenses in general that underperform a certain season, you've seen this. I mean, you've been playing for forever.
Yep.
The following year, everybody's discounted. I mean, it is a sale on everybody. This year, Williams, and I know Williams was dealing with the ACL tear from last season, but Russell Wilson, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, I mean, like all these guys you were able to get at a discount. And I think that's important to keep in mind for next year too, because it's going to feel weird drafting some of these players that stink this year, or at least coming from offenses that stink. But that can be the difference between a good team and a great team in high-stakes fantasy football the following season.
Well, there's also a reason that they stink. Like last year, Denver had significant offensive line injuries, and some of the players that they had they were garbage. And when you bring in Sean Payton and you're bringing in a new scheme, there's going to be an uptick, but the value in the drafts on these guys, they were falling. And when you can get a chance to get people like that to fill out your roster, even having Cortland Sutton as your wide receiver 4, that's a benefit.
Cade Otton, let's talk about tight ends here for a second. Cade Otton was a guy that I know high stakes players have been talking about even prior to the 2022 season. And he had his biggest game of the season this past week in week 9 against the Buffalo Bills. Cade Otton beg your pardon, not this past week. It was the week before, right? Yeah, I think it was the week before. My apologies on that. But Cade Otton is a guy that a lot of people drafted hoping that he would turn into something for a few weeks, or maybe he'd be solid enough if you got him as a backup, if your starting tight end went down or anything like that. This week he gets the Tennessee Titans, which has kind of been a Jekyll and Hyde defense this year. We are dealing with buys again this week here, Mark. Cade Otton in the tight end premium scoring Fantasy Pros Championship. Is he a guy that you would look to try to get into your lineup as a second flex?
I would. What I see is there's a relationship building between him and Mayfield. There also seems to be a lot of injuries with the Tampa receivers. They just can't seem to be healthy, and he is the kind of the safety valve. He's getting between 6 and 9 targets every single game. And when you have that out of a tight end, that's a pretty valuable player.
I misspoke too. The previous week was the Bills 4 for 27. This past week was that massive, insane game against Houston where Cade Otton ended up getting 9 targets. 6 of them were caught for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. There's some upside here, especially when you consider Chris Godwin kind of was quiet, 2 for 16. Mike Evans, 4 for 87, but that included a 53-yard catch. Baker Mayfield clearly trusts Cade Otton, and certainly FFPC players should probably start trusting him as well. Shifting the focus to running backs here for a second. I know I've been kind of all over the place, but the Bears running back situation, Khalil Herbert maybe would return this week if the Bears are playing on Sunday. They are not. They're playing in the Thursday night game against the Carolina Panthers, which means he probably, and I'm kind of just speculating when I say this, I don't think he's coming back this week against Carolina. So if we know this, and we know that we can get one more week out of the Darrington Evans, Deontay Foreman, Roschon Johnson triumvirate, is Foreman the type of guy that you would be willing to deploy as your second running back or as a flex play this week, Mark, to try to squeeze that last fantasy goodness out of him before Herbert comes back next week? And as a second question to that, once Herbert does come back, do you envision him being the bell cow right away, or are we looking at sort of a split timeshare for a couple of weeks before Herbert gets back into the swing of things?
With Foreman, I think this is the last week, depending on, your roster situation. If you need a player, I would be comfortable using him. I think this is the last week. I was kind of looking at Carolina's defense. They allow over 130 rushing yards a game. Clearly, Chicago's they're at home. They're going to want to run the ball. I think that's a good setup. After this week, I think all bets are off. You keep hearing that talk about Roschon Johnson. At some point, they're going to give him the opportunity. He's just too good. Herbert's too good, too talented. And I think it's going to be a 3-way committee going forward. And I just don't think there's going to be much value for anybody in that going forward after this week.
And that's the tricky thing. Like we get sucked into knowing that, okay, let's start the starting running back here. This is kind of something that I was facing last week in one of my leagues where I had the opportunity to pick up Keontae Ingram because he's probably going to be the starter, but it's a bad offense, bad quarterback play, and going up against one of the toughest defenses in the NFL in the Cleveland Browns. And I shied away from it, and I'm glad I did. But this is one of those things, too, where, Mark, you got to fight temptation and understand that just because a guy is the starter maybe makes it more valuable to roster him on your team, but not necessarily deploy him in your starting lineup if you don't have to.
Yep.
Kyler Murray, speaking of the Cardinals, sounds like he's coming back this week. He has been taken off the PUP list. Jonathan Gannon has already said he's going to start this week. No Joshua Dobbs, no Clayton Tune. Clayton Tune taking a backseat to Kyler Murray this week. A lot of moving parts here. They are going to be at home against the Atlanta Falcons. Number one, if you are missing anybody on a bye at quarterback, is Murray a guy that you would feel all right with starting his first week back? And number two, what Cardinals become viable starts in week 10 now with Murray throwing them the ball as opposed to Clayton Tune?
I've always been a big Murray fan. I would be real apprehensive if I had other options. With the bye weeks this week, having some of the big quarterbacks out, if you have Murray as your only other opportunity, I would plug him in there. But I'm always leery when these players come off the injuries. They just don't have a lot of practice time. Arizona's already struggling. And then, Atlanta is just kind of a mess of a team to play with. They like to run the ball. They have kind of a lower game speed. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. Arizona just seems to be a mess. A lot of injuries. I wouldn't expect a lot out of them. If I was looking at one player, I'd probably target Marquise Brown. He's the one guy that they seem to have a good relationship. They're kind of on the same page. I would take a chance there, but outside of that, I would kind of steer clear of it. give it a couple weeks, let him get his game legs back under him, and see how he starts adjusting with his team and what the offense does.
The opponent that they're playing this week is the Atlanta Falcons, and I want to touch on them just briefly here. I don't really fault NFL coaches for not caring about fantasy football. They shouldn't. They should be coaching to win games. And we're just sort of like trying to figure out what they're doing, trying to figure out what the players are doing. That part is on us. What's frustrating to me, and I don't really call out coaches, but Arthur Smith has been a guy I've called out a couple of times within the last few weeks. He has a guy in Kyle Pitts, three guys, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson, that to me should be doing a lot more. Bijan Robinson is like on a milk carton when the Falcons get into the red zone, which I don't understand. I guess I kind of understood the Kyle Pitts aspect. He's super young. He's a tight end. It's a tough position to transition to once you get to the NFL. Well, he's transitioned and he's still not getting enough touches. I mean, Jonnu Smith, for whatever reason, is getting more looks in that offense, including when the Falcons had it inside the 10 this past week. They gave Jonnu Smith 2 touches inside the 5-yard line over Kyle Pitts and over Bijan Robinson. With Pitts and London, I guess I kind of rationalized it, and I was like, all right, I get it. We can't count on these guys all the time. But, man, when you invest a premium pick like the Atlanta Falcons did in Bijan Robinson, and this guy is being underused by Arthur Smith, and Arthur Smith seems to bring up – I put this on X, like, for a guy who hates fantasy football or doesn't care about it, he sure likes to bring it up a lot in his press conferences. And for me, the thing is, like, you're 4-5, dude. Whatever you're doing, it ain't working. Maybe you should try to work these players into your offense more. Now, he's not going to listen to me, and why would he? I host podcasts. I'm not a coach of the NFL. But at the same time, when we look at starting our lineups and submitting our lineups every week, Mark, and this is going to bleed over into 2024 during draft season, if Arthur Smith is still in charge, we have to start taking into account the way the Falcons offense runs under this current head coach. And as a result, break ties in your weekly starting lineups against Atlanta Falcons. Downgrade Bijan Robinson in your drafts next year because of Arthur Smith. I think that's the only fair way to do it. How do you feel about this situation that's developing in the Dirty South?
Make room on your soapbox. I feel the same way. I can't tell you how many teams last week I had Kyle Pitts with Dalton Schultz sitting on my bench. And I know better. I think the only person that is less vested in, or the only person more vested in Kyle Pitts is his mom. I mean, I've been all over this guy for years, and 3 for 32, 2 for 29. It's maddening. And I'm about to that point too, where I'm about ready to step off the bandwagon and start making smarter choices instead of going with, I mean, what's clearly should be happening. You should be utilizing those. You spend a top draft pick on Bijan Robinson. You spend a very high draft pick on Kyle Pitts. That's not the kind of usage that you spend those kind of draft picks for.
And I'm surprised as hands-on as it seems Arthur Blank is, I'm a little weirded out the fact that he's not putting more pressure on his GM, more pressure on his head coach to get these guys more involved. You know, it's one thing if you're not utilizing these guys and you're, 6-3 or even 5-4 or anything like that. You're 4-5. Something's got to change. Hopefully it changes for the better going forward in Atlanta.
Yep.
The thing I talked about at the top of the show, Mark, is over the course of the entire season, I feel like I brought up the Baltimore Ravens running back situation quite frequently, and it's always been different people. First, it was J.K. Dobbins. Then we talked about Justice Hill. Then we talked about Gus Edwards. Now this week, we're talking about the long-awaited arrival of one Keaton Mitchell. Keaton Mitchell looked awesome last week, had a really long touchdown. And the great thing about that long touchdown, we saw the impact that his speed can have on the game. This is speed that Gus Edwards, Dobbins, Hill, they just don't have. When you look forward, and I know you have Gus Edwards on a bunch of your teams, I'm invested in him as well this year, to the point of understanding what you're doing on your Gus Edwards teams and how you're trying to figure it out going forward. How concerning was it to see Keaton Mitchell do what he did this past week, knowing that you're trying to figure out if Gus Edwards should be a starter or a sit every week?
Very concerning. And again, where I got Gus Edwards at a lot of my drafts, he has more than served his purpose. He's been very helpful, and that's what the waiver wire is for, to make sure your roster stacked for injuries and stuff like that. I was really concerned when I saw how many plays he played in last week's game. He took a 50% cut in snaps. Am I ready to jump on the Keaton Mitchell bandwagon? I probably wouldn't, just based on what he's going to cost free agent wise and what potentially happened there, because they just always seem to have that three-headed monster. Plus you have Lamar Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see him as somebody that I want to spend 100 or 200 or even more as the star of the week or the free agent pickup of the week, only to see him fall by the wayside and get 2 touches next week or, be inactive.
When you for those leagues that Mitchell is out there, and this will come into my second question right now, or my next question, I should say right now. I don't know. Quite frankly, I don't know the ownership of Mitchell in FFPC leagues. I probably should have looked that up before I came on. But have you looked to see how many of your leagues he is available in, and have you thought about a percentage that you're looking of your remaining fab to be getting him on your teams? Not necessarily just your 28th place overall team in the Fantasy Pros Championship, but your other teams in contention as well.
It looks like he's available in pretty much every league.
Okay.
The thing is, I don't think what I would be willing to pay is going to be enough to get him. And looking at kind of how the free agency seems to work, when you have these rising stars on a week, there's always somebody that puts a $200, $300, $400 last gasp effort, and I don't want to throw that kind of money on a guy that I'm not sure is going to be the main guy. I don't think my bid, what I'd be willing to bid, maybe 10-15% isn't going to be enough to get him in any league.
It's one of those things too, where like, for people who have not spent a lot of their money, this is the perfect, this is what you're looking for this late in the season. If you have 60%, 70% of your bidding dollars left, you're going to see a lot of people go all in on Keaton Mitchell this year, rightly or wrongly. And if you want him, you're going to have to bid up on him. I am kind of with you. I like to keep them honest bids in my KFFSC leagues, Mark. And I don't think I'll necessarily have to, because I think he's going to go for some buku bucks this week for sure. What are some, besides Mitchell, are there any other players that you're focusing your attention to in order to upgrade your rosters this week? Besides Mitchell, who are some of those other players that we should be thinking about?
It's interesting. On a couple leagues, I did find Elijah Mitchell was still out there. That's a guy that I would probably try to pick up just to have him, because he's one of those players that if something happens to McCaffrey, he could be a league winner, or he could be somebody that puts you over the top in a couple weeks. I was looking at Juju or even Noah Brown based on their production the last couple weeks. And, for New England, losing Kendrick Bourne, he seems to be a player that is going to get more targets and somebody that if I'm in need of a receiver that I can count on, I think he'll get, some decent amount of targets, and same with Noah Brown.
Demario Douglas pretty much taken everywhere in your league
last week.
Okay. I kind of like the last couple of weeks I've had people telling me Demario Douglas, basically ever since even the week before Bourne tore his ACL, people were talking this guy up, and I know a lot of people grabbed him before Bourne, and then that's where the discount was, right? Because if you tried to pick up Demario Douglas after Bourne tore his ACL, you were paying sticker price and then some on Demario Douglas for sure. As I look through my list here, Jalen Tolbert in Dallas. This is a guy who the majority of the year has been playing behind Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup. Is there anything there, or is this a player that you don't want to waste one of your roster spots on? You'd rather have one of those injury away type running backs instead of Jalen Tolbert?
I would hold off just based Dallas has too many things going on there. And he could be one of those feast or famine one week, but I don't think he's going to be somebody that's going to get in there and put up some big numbers and be a difference maker. I'd rather wait and hope something happens where I have a lot of money and I can get one of the, like last year, I think it was Zonovan Knight.
Yeah.
I had a lot of money in a lot of leagues, and he was a big help at the end of the year, and I was able to outbid people to get him.
Khalil Shakir, this is, I think both these guys are taken. Are you more likely to want to start Khalil Shakir or Gabe Davis going forward?
I would do Shakir. It just, for whatever reason, he just seems to have a better relationship with Josh Allen right now, and Gabe Davis just seems to be falling off the face of the earth.
I think that we are going to look back on this season, Mark, and we're going to think this is the year the rookie tight end theory that they can't perform their first year breaks.
Yep.
Laporta has been fantastic all season. I think the Packers offense, we have seen it at its worst this year. I think Musgrave's only going to get better. Now, I don't think he's going to threaten to be like, a top 12 guy or anything like that by the end of the season. But I do think he's going to get better, and he's going to be a guy. He's already rostered everywhere, but I think he's going to come on late. And then Dalton Kincaid, my God, Dalton Kincaid, what we are seeing from him the last few weeks, it has been flat out unbelievable. When we look at drafts next year, I almost think that with the rise of Laporta and Kincaid and potentially Musgrave and Michael Mayer, who will be in his second year next year, I wonder how that's going to change the tight end landscape when we try to see how players like yourself are attacking the tight end position in the tight end premium FFPC.
I'm kind of excited about it because I've been trying to go tight end heavy or grab a good tight end early. Kelsey, Andrews, I have those in quite a few teams. I think it's important to get a good tight end, and there always seem to be the tier one, the mid tier, which includes Waller and Pitts. And then there's the afterthoughts. And I think next year there's going to be 7 or 8 guys that you're going to want to try to get in the first 3 rounds to make sure you have a solid tight end. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I'm very excited too, because I think we could finally see, I don't want to say a level playing field, but there's been so much emphasis on getting a top 3 or a top 4 guy. And next year, how far does that go down? Top 7, top 8, maybe more. We'll see. Plus, we got another crop of tight ends coming in next year. I don't think it's all that great for rookies, but you never know what will happen on that. Before we can get to 2024, we have to polish off 2023. Let's talk Week 10, 2023 here, Mark. A sleeper that you think not a lot of people are thinking about that maybe they should be looking at starting this week, as well as a player that's probably going to be started in a lot of spots by a lot of FFPC players that you think that you're a little bit nervous about his production and what it's going to be this weekend?
The one guy I was really thinking about, I've been reading a lot this week, and everybody's kind of poo-pooing Tony Pollard. He hasn't scored in a long time. He hasn't had a decent, really decent game in a long time. Everybody's kind of looking at that giant. The Giant game is going to be a blowout, so maybe not as much playing time. But I think Pollard is ready for a real big bounce back game. In terms of players who everybody's probably going to want to start that I'm a little leery of is Jones from Green Bay. I have a lot of exposure to him. He finally came through last week, but Pittsburgh's defense is pretty stout, especially when playing at home. That Green Bay offense is still a mess. And it worries me. I can see a 12 or 13 carry for 30 yard and 2 or 3 catch game and 5 or 6 fantasy points.
I'm gonna talk about both these players. I'll start with Aaron Jones. Number one, I think this last week in Week 9 was the first time we saw him at full strength since Week 1. He was either hurt or they were holding him back as far as his snap count goes because they didn't want him to re-injure that hamstring. Number 2 on that, little bit of a red herring because he did it against the Rams defense, which, Aaron Donald aside is a pretty bad defense. The one aspect of Aaron Jones that makes you feel warm and fuzzy about him, or as warm and fuzzy as you can feel about Aaron Jones, he makes that offense go. That offense is literally nothing without that dude in the backfield. And I think Matt LaFleur finally got it through his head that, like, look, this offense, we're not going to put up points unless it's through Aaron Jones. And he got a ton of volume last week. To your point, Mark, that was against the Rams. This is against the Steelers. Total on this game is low. The Packers are an underdog. It's not a great game script for Aaron Jones. I will say that I think he gets a full workload, which is going to be good if you have Aaron Jones. Is that going to translate into fantasy points? Kind of with you. I think it's a quiet week for Aaron Jones this week. Pollard, on the other hand, I just looked at this. So Tommy DeVito is the starting quarterback for the Giants this week, right? Yeah. Tyrod Taylor on IR, Daniel Jones on IR. They signed Jacob Eason to the practice squad. But it's going to be DeVito taking on that Cowboys defense in Big D. The Cowboys open up as a 10-point favorite in that game, Mark. They are now a 16.5-point favorite with a total of 38.5. If Pollard's ever going to do it, this is the week. This could be his signature game of the season. I think if you have him, you're starting him for sure. For those teams that are loaded at running back, and maybe you got lucky on the waiver wire or injuries or whatever, and Tony Pollard has not been a slam dunk for you, don't overthink it this week. Get Pollard in there. Don't think about it. He's going to have a big week.
That's what I think.
I love the Pollard call. I love the Jones call. And I love the conversation we had tonight, Marc Davidson, the 28th place team owner in the FantasyPros Championship. Not your only team in both that and the main event. I know you got several teams in contention trying to make it into the championship round. I wish you nothing but the best of luck. I hope the ball bounces your way this weekend. And hopefully you bring home that $1 million grand prize, not only in the FantasyPros Championship, but the FFPC main event as well. Thank you for the insight, my friend. We'll do this again real soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
You bet. Marc Davidson, ladies and gentlemen, hopping aboard the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown tonight, 28th place overall in the FantasyPros Championship. That's going to do it for tonight's show. We will go live again Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. 7th place team owner in the FFPC main event, Bill Wonky, is going to join us join me on the program next week. That'll be a blast. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show is live at 7 o'clock this Thursday night on the Better Sports Network and the FFPC social channels, including YouTube, X, and Facebook. 4 for 4's John Daigle will hang out with me for 2 hours. We'll take you right into that Thursday night game between Carolina and Chicago. High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour goes live at 10 o'clock this Friday night with KFFSC Commissioner Farrell Elliott and myself. We're going to be speaking to the co-owners of the third place team in the FFPC main event. That's Peter Puzo and Paul Teixeira will both be joining us. We'll have a jam-packed Friday show with 4 people on. I don't know how Farrell's going to get a word in edgewise, but somehow he always seems to. Go to myffpc.com to play the FFPC Weekly Playoff Challenge, or the Weekly Challenge right now. Playoff Challenge will be coming up next month. We'll get that open. But yeah, the Weekly Challenge, myffpc.com. No draft, no salary cap. Just choose your team. No stacking on these teams. You can only choose one player per NFL team. You can play with kickers and defenses or without kickers and defenses. Just get them submitted by 1 o'clock and watch those points pile up as you try to win as much as $2,500 each and every week in the FFPC Weekly Challenge at myffpc.com. Enter for as little as $35. That's myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified anytime we go live, which will once again be this coming Thursday at 7 o'clock Eastern time, right here on the FFPC YouTube channel, as well as the Better Sports Network with myself and 4 for 4's John Daigle. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. If you're downloading this later on rotoviz.com or anywhere you get podcasts, we appreciate it. Marc Davidson is the man. We will be back next week with Bill Wonky. Be good, everybody, and I hope the ball bounces your way in week number 10.